Hey guys, welcome back to a new video, new stream. Uh, Day 7 of learning how to code. Hi, learning to code, learning not how to code, learning to code, learning how to code, whatever, learning code. Hi, I can do whatever. Thank you so much, Ben. So much, Dr. Ben. Kani, Hanji. Oh. な恋な恋な恋だな恋 जिंदगी में जो तुम्हारे सिवा तंदीना साथ मेरा दूंगा wait people 100 people is all watching right now. I am古いだよね。だってさTu kunci Okay. Tukunche. Hi. Start. Let's start. 1,000 people in the line. They are so beautiful to me. Buddy. Arichi. Ada pare gande. Pare. I'm sorry. Yeah, だよ。なんでだよ。何だよ。Okay. That was disgusting. दस मिनट तो ऐसे वेस्ट करता हूँ. टाइम लगता है भैया, टाइम लगता है. हेलो यो ऐसे नहीं करता, झटका नहीं देता मैं, आराम से स्टार्ट करने का. सुबह 5 बजे स्टार्ट कर भाई, क्या ही है. लाइफ है ना, लाइफ कुत्ती है साली. हाँ बस पूछो मत क्यों. हाँ क्या किया, कुछ पता नहीं. But that is इसको करता हूँ तो ये उतर जाता है, इसको करता हूँ तो ये उतर जाता है, वो उतर जाता है, ये वो करके ही मैं संतकी को सारा करके आऊँ अपनी. यस okay, let's start. Enough of stupidity. Today, I will continue the a tutorial that I was watching 3-4 days ago, I guess. Yeah, before reading the doc, I finished one project from it and then read the article. I mean the React docs. Yeah, so I learned a lot. Now I'm gonna do this and We'll learn a few more things, and then I can read the docs. How about those things? And yeah, that's how I'm gonna do it. Hey, start.
So it is now time to dive into project number 2, which should be absolutely wicked. We'll encounter some of the stuff we've already seen in project number 1, and we'll also build upon that with some additional React functionality, such as how we can fetch data, all sorts of cool stuff as we build out this Pokédex. Now for this project, I've opened up a completely new blank instance of Visual Studio Code. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit open, and we're once again going to navigate to our React full course project directory. Once we've found that, it's inside my folder with all of my coding projects, I'm going to click the open button, and that's going to open up VS Code into our React full course folder. And we can see in here we have the first project, which is the to-do app. That's all complete, and we also have some of this code open, which we're just going to go ahead and close if that's happened for you. Now from within here, we're also going to need to open up a terminal. If you're looking for all of the terminal commands, be sure to come over to the VS Code shortcuts.smalljames.com. It has everything on, how you can basically become a VS Code wizard. And to open the terminal, we're just going to hit the Control plus backtick keys, and that is going to bring up a terminal for us. Now, just like with the previous project, the first thing we have to do is actually initialize a new React project, and we're once again going to do that with Vite, which, as always, is linked in the description down below. And if you come to this page, the command we're going to need is a node package manager command, where we create a Vite project. Now we're going to go ahead and type this into our terminal, npm create Vite at latest, that's just for the latest version of Vite. And then we're going to have a space, and we're going to name our project Pokédex. I'm going to hit enter on that. It's going to ask us to select a framework. I'm going to come to the React framework, and I'm going to choose JavaScript. Now lucky us, we have the commands to get started with our project. We're going to cd into Pokédex. So that's the change directory command into Pokédex. And then we're going to run npm install, which is just going to install all of the packages, node packages that we're going to need for our React project. You can actually come and see them if you open up this Pokédex folder. You'll see all of the code that comes with a boilerplate React project. And inside of the package.json, we can see that the npm packages, which are also referred to as dependencies, are basically, and I'm going to choose JavaScript. Now lucky us, we have the commands to get started with our project. We're going to cd into Pokédex. So that's the change directory command into Pokédex. And then we're going to run npm install, which is just going to install all of the packages, node packages that we're going to need for our React project. You can actually come and see them if you open up this Pokédex folder. You'll see all of the code that comes with a boilerplate React this need, which is command project framework. I'm going to come to the React framework, and I'm going to choose JavaScript. Now lucky us, we have the commands to get started with our project. We're going to cd into Pokédex. So that's the change directory command into Pokédex. And then we're going to run npm install, which is just going to install all of the packages, node packages that we're going to need for our React project. You can actually come and see them if you open up this Pokédex folder. You'll see all of the code that comes with a boilerplate React project. And inside of the package.json, we can see that the npm packages, which are also referred to as dependencies, are basically just React. So it's super simple, and that is going to get everything running. And now we're basically ready for the last step, where we just have to run npm run dev. But just before we do that, let's quickly go over these folders again. We did it before, but we're just going to do it once more real quickly. So first we have the vite.config. We don't need to touch it. It's just saying that we have a vite/react project. After that we have the readme.md. These will all be filled out at the end of the course. I'd recommend throwing these in because if an employer is looking at your projects, it's a great place for you to give them a text overview of what you've done, why you've done it, and how you have gone about doing it. So that can be super cool. Readme.md uses the .markdown syntax if you weren't familiar, and it's basically just a simple text formatting language. I actually have a course on it linked in the description down below if you want to become a Markdown pro. After that we have the package.json. That's just got some important information for configuring our project. We have the package-lock.json, which we do not touch. We have the index.html, which is where all of the React code gets rendered within this root div via the main.jsx script, which is inside the source folder, which renders out our app, which we can find in the app.javascript. And when we come into the app.javascript, which is the parent of our entire application, we can see we've got some boilerplate code, and we're just going to get rid of absolutely everything. We're going to blank it all out because we don't need any of it until all we have is the bare bones of a React function. Code gets rendered within this JSON. That's just got some important information for configuring our project. We have the package-lock.json, which we do not touch. We have the index.html, which is where all of the React code gets rendered within this root div via the main.jsx script within this HTML, which is where all of the React code gets rendered within this root div via the main.jsx script, which is inside the source folder, which renders out our app, which we can find in the app.javascript. And when we come into the app.javascript, which is the parent of our entire application, we can see we've got some boilerplate code, and we're just going to get rid of absolutely everything. We're going to blank it all out because we don't need any of it until all we have is the bare bones of a React functional component. The functional component is just a function. It's called the app, and from within it we return the JSX that then gets rendered on the screen. Now we can also get rid of this app.css. We don't need it. We're going to use Fanta-CSS for this project as well. All of the styles are once again pre-completed for you. All you have to do is come over to the index.css file inside of the GitHub repo. Don't forget to start index.pre-completed for you. All you have to do is come over to the index.css file inside of the GitHub repo. Don't forget to start the repo if you haven't. Love that support. And either download the file directly from there into this folder, or you can just copy the styles across like I'm about to do. So here I'm going to copy all of the styles across. It should be about 200 across like I'm about to over to the index.css file inside of the GitHub. Repo. Don't forget to star the repo if you haven't. Love that support. And either download the file directly from there into this folder, or you can just copy the styles across like I'm about to do. So here I'm going to copy all of the styles across. It should be about 276 lines of styles. This is all for the layout, and then we're going to also need to download the Fanta.
I downloaded the wrong ones. Makka. No, it's not a component. Stupid.
.css file, which once again should be available inside of this repo, or you can go to the Fanta CSS repo, and I'm just going to paste that in here. So we've got our CSS files. We've got a blank app.jsx. We don't need to touch the main except for importing the new Fanta CSS styles. So we're just going to go ahead and import Fanta.css. Now, with all of that done, we can boot up our application by coming back to the terminal and running npm run dev. That's going to start up your project, I presume, on localhost 5173. And we can go ahead and paste that into the browser, and that's just going to load up our blank application. And we can check that it's working by coming into the app inside of the JSX. You can just write something, save the file, and that is now loaded onto the screen. Excellent. Now, for the Pokédex, we're going to introduce a new concept in this video, which is how we can fetch data from an external source known as an API. And the API in question is the Poke API. So if we Google that, once again, linked in the description down below, we can load that up, and it's a RESTful API that serves over 2.5 billion API calls per month. Now, if you're not familiar with APIs, all that happens is your website basically makes a call, a network request to someone else's body of code that is linked or connected to the internet, and someone else's body of code that is APIs. All that happens is your website basically makes a call, a network request to someone else's body of code that is linked or connected to the internet, and when you send that request, they basically just send you back a whole lot of data. So it's super efficient. And in our application, we do that very simply. If you think about our user effect in the previous project, that was used to read in information from our database when our application is good to go. This works very similarly. We could almost think of this REST API as a database, an external database that we can access. You can try it out here. You can kind of see how the URLs work, how to make the requests, what the information that you get back looks like, and that is what we're going to be implementing into our project. Now, the other thing we're going to need for our React project is a whole lot of components. So what I'm going to do first, inside the source directory, I'm going to create a new folder called components. Now, for this project, we'll need a few of them. We're going to need a header.jsx, which is obviously the file extension. And there we're going to export a function called header. And that's just going to, for the minute, return the header tags. A simple 5 lines of code, and we have our first React functional component. Now, when I'm making these, you'll notice that each component is basically one of the building blocks of our application. And that, for me, is like a great way to practice compartmentalizing the different pieces that come together to build an effective application. The second one on our list is going to be the side nav.jsx. Now notice that the nav is capitalized as well. And once again, in here, we're going to export a function called side nav, and that's going to return the nav HTML tags. Now this nav is going to basically render out all the different Pokemon from the original 151 Pokemon in the first Pokedex. And then the user is going to be able to select different Pokemon and get the breakdown of all the stats, all the different moves, see all the pictures, and it's going to be wicked. Obviously, when they've clicked on one of the HTML tags. Now this nav is going to basically render out all the different Pokemon from the original 151 Pokemon in the first Pokedex. And then the user is going to be able to select different Pokemon and get the breakdown of all the stats, all the different moves, see all the pictures, and it's going to be wicked. Obviously, when they've clicked on one of the projects, we're going to need a pokecard.jsx. And in here, once again, we're going to export a function called pokecard, and that's going to, just in this case, return an empty div. And this is going to contain all of the Pokemon information. After that, we're going to have the typecard.jsx. In here we're going to export the function type card, enter that onto a new line, and just return an empty div. Now the type card is a little component I made specifically for the code that is used to render out the type of Pokemon. If it's enter that onto a new line and just return an empty div. Now the type card is a little component I made specifically for the code that is used to render out the type of Pokemon. If it's poison, if it's flying, if it's steel, if it's normal, if it's water, ice dragon, so on and so forth. And then last but not least, and this is going to be a new component, modal.jsx, and in here we're going to just export that function modal, and in this case we're going to just type the return keyword, and for the second we're not going to return anything from this modal. Now if you're not familiar with what a modal is inside of React, it's basically just a pop-up overlay on the screen. And they can be super helpful, and in this case this pop-up is going to allow a user to click on a skill or a move that a Pokemon is able to learn, and then get a breakdown, a text description of what that move actually is, as an overlay that they can then click out of afterwards. And with that all done, those are the components complete for this project. Now there's another configuration folder that we have to set up in just a second that is new. But before that, the other thing I want to mention is that in this project, we're also going to learn how to cache information that we have searched from an external site. And the reason we're going to do that is because if you don't
Caching information means storing data temporarily so it can be reused quickly instead of being recomputed and reloaded. Simply meaning, baby words, save something so you don't have to do the same work again. Storing data temporarily so it can be reused quickly. Faster performance, less repeated work, better user experience, reduced network calls. Browser remembers a website, loads faster next time. Phone remembers images, doesn't download again. App remembers results, avoid recalculating. How to take examples. Remember the cache. Cache. HTML images. HTML, JavaScript image. When not to cache cheap calculations, data that changes constantly, premature optimization, online interview, caching it strongly, storing previous computed or hashed data so it can be used quickly instead of recalculated.
Cache, we're going to learn how to cache information that we have searched from an external site. And the reason we're going to do that is because if you don't cache the information, where a cache just refers to saving it locally, and we're going to use the same local storage database that we used in the previous instance, what can end up happening is you can end up overwhelming, let's say 100 people use your site and they're all fetching information from the Pokemon API. You could end up DDoSing them, which means overwhelming their servers with a number of fetch requests saying like, get me this Pokemon, get me this Pokemon. And if you do that thousands of times, they can block you. So what we end up doing is we cache everything that we fetch, which means that we only have to fetch the information for each Pokemon once. And after that, we have our own, we basically build up our own database, and then we can just access it locally and we don't have to overwhelm their servers. So that'll be super cool. Now the last thing we're going to need to create inside of our source directory is another folder, and this one is called utils. Now utils folders are typically for any kind of utility function or JavaScript that you're going to have, and we have a fair amount of utility necessary for this project. In here we're going to create a file. It's a JavaScript file using the .js extension called index. Now we're going to hit enter on that file, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy it straight from the repo, so you can look for this folder and file and just copy everything into this file. And now we're going to have a breakdown once that's copied across of what everything does. So first up, we have a list of the first 151 Pokemon, which we need in order to be able to render out that side nav. So we're going to return basically a button for every Pokemon, which allows the user to click on a Pokemon and then consequently show up all the information. Underneath that, we have some color specification information, and these are for all of the types which will be relevant in this type card component. So when we render out the little tile for a water Pokemon, it's got the text color in addition to the background color to create the appropriate tile. Now these are just super annoying admin colors that I wanted to have basically done in advance, so it's good just to have them available when we go and do that. Underneath that, we just have two functions. The first one is to get the Pokédex number, and the reason we've got this function is because JavaScript is a zeroth indexing system. So when we go and render out that side navigation using the mapping syntax, we're going to get access to the index, which is going to start from 0, but the Pokemon start with 1. So when we want to get the number of a Pokemon, all we have to do is find the index and add 1 onto it. And I created a function for it just to add all the clarity that we possibly can. And then the last function we have down here is to get the full Pokédex number. And this is just some string format to get the full Pokédex number. And this is just some string formatting where basically all of the Pokemon are 3 digits. Even if it's the first Pokemon, it's 001. Obviously, if we just get the Pokemon number, it might just return 7. And so this is just some string syntaxing that will throw in the extra zeros so that we always have a 3-digit number. And those are our utility functions and objects and arrays for this project. So that's pretty cool. All of that is done. I'm going to go ahead and close that file, and now we have
Dragon. Pokemon type colors. Normal is that color. Fire, water, electric, grass, icy, fire, poison, ground, flying, psychic, rock, ghost, dragon, dog, steel, fairy. That's the index. Pokedex, number, Pokedex. Yeah, Pokedex. Banana. Pokemon. Export functions. Okay.
Have open our main components. So we're going to start at the top of the application inside of the app.jsx. And in here, what we are going to do is start off by rendering out the components. Right here I've got James. James is not going to be a part of this application. The first one we're going to render out is the header component. Now I'm going to take advantage of the auto import, and that is going to be self-closing. After that, we're going to have the side nav component. Make sure we import that up the top, and that is also self-closing. And then under that, finally, we're going to have the Poke card component, which is going to have all of the Pokemon information in our application. Now, if I go and save these and come back into our application, it's still completely blank.
Side nav. Wow. Shana kara hada kara da kara Poke card. मजा आ रहा है बताएं किस कहाँ से कहाँ जा रहे हैं साले अरे तेरी माँ की कराना इसको नहीं कराना इसको तेरे बाप को अबे क्या अबे साढ़े ये है ना साढ़े मुझे परेशान करती हैं ये लोग है ना बहुत बेकार है साले आप पोकर डेक नहीं है कार्ड है वो Tomate.
Now if I go and save these and come back into our application, it's still completely blank, and that's...
Mine's not blank, bitch. It shouldn't be. What's wrong with it? Mine shouldn't be blank. Header for header. Tap something. Oh my god. If I don't have that. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Yeah, stupid.
Because these are currently empty components. And the other thing I'm quickly going to do at this point is just change the title of our application, which, if you recall, is inside of the meta information, which is contained within the head tags, which is in the index.html.
Pokemon.
In here,
Nice
we're just
Pokemon.
going to change this to your name. So this is going to be James's Pokedex.
Pokemon.
Very nice and simple, and I'm actually going to use the special E with the right hand side thing, and that's going to now change that to James's Pokedex. So that's looking pretty good. We have a totally blank application, but we've configured just about everything. So since we've got all of these components rendered, and the first one I'm actually going to start off with is the side nav. Now this project is a little bit clever because in making it mobile responsive, we have some elements chop and change as to whether or not they show up on the screen. So the side nav is going to be the primary navigation method on the larger device size, whereas the header is going to start off with is the side nav. Now this project is a little bit clever because in making it mobile responsive, we have some elements chop and change as to whether or not they show up on the screen. So the side nav is going to be the primary navigation method on the larger device size, whereas the header is going to be the start of the navigation system for the mobile device size. And this is all going to become very clear as we build it out. But just for the bigger screen, I'm going to start off with the side nav. Now, if we come into that component right there, we can see it's very simply just got these two little nav tags. And what we're going to need inside of this side side nav is access to all of the Pokemon. So what we're going to do inside of this side nav is access to all of the Pokemon. So what we're going to do is now import the first 151 Pokemon from that utils folder. Now one interesting thing that you might notice is that I obviously don't specify the index.javascript in the path for the file. And the reason I can get away with doing that is specifically because any file called index is the default export from that folder. So basically, if I'm just wanting to get away with doing that is specifically because any file called index is the default export from that folder. So basically, if I'm just wanting to have one file inside of this utils folder, if I name it index, then I don't have to specify it. I can just import the folder as if it were actually the file. Now the nav is going to be pretty straightforward. First, what we're going to do is get all the Pokemon rendering on the screen. So I'm going to use the curly braces to add some JavaScript inside of the JSX, which is going to allow me to map out the array of Pokemon. So we're going to access that and use the map method, which takes the arrow function. Now in here, we're going to return from the arrow function a button, and that's going to allow the user to click on the Pokemon. Now this mapping function is going to need some arguments.
ちょっと待って。Backspace. You don't do that.
The arrow function. Use the curly braces to add some JavaScript inside of the JSX, which is going to allow me to map out the array of Pokemon. So we're going to access that and use the map method, which takes the arrow function. Now in here, we'll access that and use the map method, which takes the arrow function. Now in here, we're going to return from the arrow function a button, and that's going to allow the user to click on the Pokemon.
Returns a new array.
Now this mapping function is going to need some arguments. The first one is obviously the actual Pokemon, which is the element or the entry in that index of the array. And the second one we're going to access is the Pokemon index, which is the index in the array, which is also going to allow us to access the Pokemon number or the number of the Pokemon in the Pokedex. So we're going to expect those two things as arguments. And now in here, what we can do is just create some paragraph tags, use the curly braces, and throw in the Pokemon. And if I go ahead and save that and reload the page, we can see that we now have a big old list of Pokemon
You use that, right? But no. Yeah, written button. That's what I'm. Okay. For some reason it's not working. Did I close it? Is it running? Yeah, of course it's up and running. Export app. I think I have. No, I know what I've done, I guess. Export. And then export here too. Should be a problem though. So just take a div. I think I made some mistake. What could it be though? My Pokédex, Pokemon. How does though? Rank showed. गाली के दे रहा है. Header. That's the problem, man. Okay, that's was the header. So one is fine. Headers. there were no headers here. That it should work. Yeah, always make silly mistakes. Header. Here it was that when it was working.
Throw in.
Yeah, couldn't. अरे की माँ करे
paragraph things is right. The actual.
Have I made any some mistake? I guess. Yeah, that's the starting bitch. Just started and import. Am I not supposed to use that bracket? Yeah, no.
Fetch.
So.
The large.
Header, Poke card, site nav, function app, return. Everything looks fine.
Larger device size was tags.
Function site nav. My export function site now. Yo, what have I done? Yo, what's wrong with that? तेरी माँ कर
side nav.
Export import. Header. Why is it not? That's because I put that. Because of that. No. Hey.
Simply just got these two.
Oh, why is this not working? Why? It's not happening. How do you end it? Like that? My, why is this not? Okay, I need to. I'm gonna delete it, Fantasy SS. Is there something because of this? These are the things that I imported from here, so. Nope. Nope. You delete. Go to hell. Go to hello world. Go to hello world. Shh. Cha 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 cha. Fantasy SS. Yeah, it was working before. No, it's not working. What's wrong? What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? Well, what's wrong with that? Utils. What the hell? Oh. Shoot. इसकी दिमाग खराब हो गया मेरा. एक तो इनका अच्छा copy his app. I know I need to do that. Yeah, this was working. Okay. Give me something. Ah! Fine, motherfucker. Motherfucker. Why is it not... Why that thing is not coming? God dang it. Yeah, of course. I'm gonna have to do that. It's your name now. Bitch. This is a bitch. This is a bitch. This is bitch. Finally it worked. Charmander, Bulbasaur, Charmander. I only know the Bulbasaur, Charmander. Know the names. Never watched any Pokemon. I don't know the Pikachu. I know Pikachu. Yeah, that's it. Only know 3, and one I know my Pikachu is the yellow one, and those Charmander and Bulbasaur, I know their names. What's the problem? What's the problem? Meowing. Because of that? Because of that, motherfucker? What the fuck? Sorry. Is it because of that? If it's that, then I think it's, yeah, because of that. Because of that. Yana. Yare da ze. Yare da ze. Yare da ze. Yare. Oh. Okay. सच में यार ये क्या ही है भाई, मार बहुत बुरा मारूंगा मैं इसको। कर रहा हूँ तो तेरी हैंड की तेरी मैंने नहीं करना रे यार, मैंने कर रही है तो कुछ सारे ओके Can it made it? Mama. It's running. Press Alt L-O. It's running. If I add this thing, then it doesn't work. Like, it's working. What? It's running. Poke card. What was I importing though? A poke card, right? Come on. I'm not that stupid. Bitch. Again, it happened. Mika. Nice water bottle, bro. Thanks. डर के आगे जीत है. Open Poke card code. There is nothing in it. Poke. Stupid. I'm so stupid. Now I knew this. It's Poke card, not deck.
Now, if we come into that component right there, we can see it's very simple to load out the basically math. Obviously, the number of arguments, use the curly braces and throw in the Pokemon. And if I go ahead and save that and reload the page, we can see that we now have a big old list of Pokemon on the side of our application. Now the styling is a bit random because we haven't added a whole lot of classes, and we'll tidy that up in just a second. But that right there is our side nav with 151 Pokemon that a user can go and select that will be displayed in here. So how handy is that? All we had to do is write out, a good 5 lines of code, and we've got 151 buttons available. To us. Now the other thing I'm going to have within the button is some more JavaScript that's within a paragraph. So we're going to have another paragraph tag, and that's also going to have the curly braces because it's JavaScript. And in here we're going to call our utility function get full Pokedex number, hit enter so that we automatically import that up the top, and we can invoke that function with a circular parentheses, and we can pass in the Pokemon index, and that's going to return the string formatted Pokemon index. So now we've got 001 all the way up to 151, which is Mew. After that, we're going to give this button some classes, and that is going to be class equal to, and I'm actually going to backspace the strings here and use the curly parentheses because this is going to be a dynamic class name that we're going to add some stuff to later. And then I'm going to create the starter string, and this is going to be the default, and I'm just going to give that the class of navcard. And now all of these just look a bit cleaner, and you can see we have a slight hover effect. Now above all this stuff inside of our nav, we're going to have a div. And this div is going to have a class of header, and it's also going to be wrapped within the curly braces. Now at this point I just want to make a reminder that all of the classes, when I use the keyword class, it's obviously meant to be the class name. And that is the attribute that gets added to the opening tag to apply these styles. Now within here, we're going to need an h1 tag, and that is going to have the class name equal to text gradient, and that's going to have the text pokey, where the E is actually this E. So I realize I made that mistake earlier. The first E is the accented E, and now that's going to show up at the top of our list, super clean. And then underneath this div, we're going to have an input, and that's just going to be a self-closing tag, and that's going to let a user search for a Pokemon at a later point. So just like that, we actually have a pretty tidy looking side navigation bar. So I'm super pleased about that. Very nice. So just like that, we actually have a pretty tidy looking side navigation bar. So I'm super pleased about that. Very nice. Now with that done, we're actually going to get straight into the nitty-gritty, which is all of the fetching information and also how we can cache that information. And that's possibly going to be the biggest part of this entire project. So because it's slightly more complicated, we're really going to take a second to break everything down. And before we dive into that, I realize we're quickly going to come back into the index.html and swap these e's around because we can't have them the wrong way. We're really going to take a second to break everything down. And before we dive into that, I realize we're quickly going to come back into the index.html and swap these e's around because we can't have them the wrong way around, the Pokédex. And that is now correct. That's the accented E. So to dive into fetching data from an API, specifically the Pokédex API, where the Pokédex API is basically just an external database that we create a network request to request the information, the data that we create a API, where the Pokédex API fetching data from an API, specifically the Pokédex API, where the Pokédex API is basically accented E. So to dive into fetching data from an API, specifically the Pokédex API, where the Pokédex API is basically just an external database that we create a network request to request the information, the data from the API, we first need to understand where we're going to have all of this code. And if we're getting a whole lot of data, it ultimately comes down to where do we need this data in our application. And so if we quickly run through all of our components, we have a header, which we're getting a whole lot of data. It ultimately comes down to where do we need this data in our application. And so if we quickly run through all of our components, we have a header, which we haven't really coded out yet, but I can tell you it doesn't need this information. We have a modal. We also don't need it there. We do need it inside of the Pokédex. We don't need it in the side nav, and the type card is a subset of the poker card. So the moral of the story is that we're going to initialize all of this logic inside of the poker card. Now the other thing that's important is the data we're fetching is dependent on which Pokemon is selected. And that is dependent on which Pokemon is selected. And that is something that the user is going to be able to interact with, which should prompt you, and gradually will over time, to think that we're going to need to initialize a stateful variable, which in this case is going to be named selected Pokemon, so that the user can select the Pokemon they want to research. Now in this case, we will need the information in the header and the side nav and the Poke card. And because we can't communicate that information horizontally across components, we can only do it from parent to child. We're going to have to define that inside of the app. Now, the first thing we need to do to initialize a stateful variable is import and destructure out the useState React hook from the React package. So we have the curly braces and then we have useState. And then within the functional component, we can now initialize that stateful variable. We can say const selected Pokemon, and that goes within the square braces. And then the second entry in the array is the setter function, which is just set selected Pokemon. And that is equal to useState. We call the hook, and I'm going to initialize it at the index 0. For the 0th index in our Pokemon list, which I believe is Bulbasaur. That's going to be the first Pokemon. So the default Pokemon that is shown is always going to be Bulbasaur. So now that we have initialized this variable, we're going to pass it everywhere it's needed, which is going to be inside of the side nav. So we're going to pass it down as an attribute style prop. We're going to label that information selected Pokemon, and we're going to prop. We're going to side nav. So we're going to pass it down as an attribute, which is going to be inside of the side nav. So we're going to pass it down as an attribute style prop. We're going to label that information selected Pokemon, and we're going to provide the value, which is going to be the currently selected Pokemon. We're also going to need to pass down the setter function. So we're going to say set selected Pokemon, and we're going to assign the setter function to that key or that attribute style prop. And likewise with the Poke card, we're going to just need the selected Pokemon, because within there we're going to fetch all the information about that particular function to. We're going to say set selected Pokemon, and we're going to assign the setter function to that key or that attribute style prop. And likewise with the Poke card, we're going to just need the selected Pokemon, because within there we're going to fetch all the information about that particular Pokemon. Now I'm not going to worry about receiving the props in the side nav just yet. We'll get to that shortly. We're just going to focus on fetching the data for, in this case, the very first Pokemon, because that's what is currently selected even though it's default. So
I'm just gonna copy it. I don't want to make typos.
So just because that's what the data for. Or in this case, that shortly, we're just going to focus on fetching the data for, in this case, the very first Pokemon, because that's what is currently selected even though it's default. So just here, we've passed down the selected Pokemon information Pokemon, because that's what is currently selected even though it's default. So just here, we've passed down the selected Pokemon information via the attribute style props. So what we now need to do is come across to that component and let it know that it needs to receive the props or the information, and from within them we can destructure out the selected Pokemon. So we use the destructuring JavaScript syntax, and that's going to give us access to the Pokemon. Now if you recall back to what I said in this video earlier about when we fetch the information, and even further back to our to-do list, we fetch the information to display on the screen once our application is fully structure out the selected Pokemon. So we use the destructuring JavaScript syntax, and that's going to give us access to the Pokemon. Now if you recall back to what I said in this video earlier about when we fetch the information, and even further back to our to-do list, we fetch the information to display on the screen once our application is fully the information, and even further back to our to-do list, we fetch the information to display on the screen once our application is fully loaded, and we do it using the use effect React hook. So the next thing I'm going to do is come up to the top of my component above where we actually define the component, and I'm going to import the use effect hook from the React package. Can destructure So just here, we've passed down the selected Pokemon information via the attribute style props. So what we now need to do is come across to that component and let it know that it needs to receive the props or the information, and from within them we can destructure out the selected Pokemon. So we use the destructuring JavaScript syntax, and that's going to give us access to the Pokemon. Destructuring JavaScript syntax, and that's going to give us access to the Pokemon.
No. Like that.
Can destructure out the selected Pokemon. So we use the destructuring JavaScript syntax, and that's going to give us access to the Pokemon. Now, if you recall back to what I said in this video earlier about when we fetch the information, and even further back to our to-do list, we fetch the information to display on the screen once our application is fully loaded, and we do it using the use effect React hook. So do it using the screen once our application is fully loaded, and we do it using the use effect React hook. The information, and even further, what I said in this video earlier about when we fetch the information, and even further back to our to-do list, we fetch the information to display on the screen once our application is fully loaded, and we do it using the use effect React hook. So the next thing I'm going to do is come up to the top of my component above where we actually define the component, and I'm going to import the use effect hook from the React package. Now, if you recall to our first video, the way the use effect works is we invoke it, and it takes two inputs. The first is a callback function. It's the function to be executed whenever the event that we're listening for is triggered. The second input or argument is the dependency array. And that is, you can actually see it here, we have the React dependency list, and in this case, an input or argument is the dependency array. And that is, you can actually see it here, we have the React dependency list, and in this case, if present, effect will only activate if the values in the list change. So that's super handy. And so the question becomes, what events are we listening for? Well, we're listening for whenever the selected Pokemon event changes. Because whenever we change that event, we're going to need to re-download or re-fetch the new information for the new Pokemon. So we're going to throw the variable select whenever the selected Pokemon event changes. Because whenever we change that event, we're going to need to re-download or re-fetch the new information for the new Pokemon. So we're going to throw the variable selected Pokemon into that dependency array. Now, what I'm going to do next is open up this callback function, the logic to be executed whenever the event that we're listening for is triggered, in this case whenever selected Pokemon changes. And we're going to start off by writing some pseudocode to break down exactly how this data fetching process, in addition to caching the information, is going to work. So I'm going to leave a whole lot of code comments to walk us through this process. First up, what we're going to do, to caching the information is going to work. We're going to start off by writing some pseudocode to break down exactly how this data fetching process, in addition to caching the information, is going to work. So I'm going to leave a whole lot of code comments to walk us through this process. First up, what we're going to do is we're going to have a loading state. So we're going to say if loading exit loop, because we don't want to refetch multiple times if we're already loading information. And that should actually, so we're going to say if loading exit loop, because we don't want to refetch multiple times if we're already loading information. And that should actually be exit logic. After that, what we're going to do is we've established we're not currently loading anything, so we're safe to go and fetch information. We need to see if we can access that information from the cache, which means that we've already got it before and we can withhold from fetching new information from the API. So we need to check if the selected Pokemon information is available in the cache. Now this is going to happen in a few steps. First, we need to define the cache. And then the second is to check if the selected Pokemon is in the cache, otherwise fetch from the API. And then if we do fetch from the API, the third step is pretty much to, actually I'm just going to write this out. If we fetch from the API, make sure to save the information to the cache for next time. And these three steps are going to prevent us from basically getting banned from the API, and we're going to have a very efficient application. It's so important to learn to cache appropriate information. Now, you don't want to cache everything for all different projects. Caching only exists when you can guarantee that the information you're fetching changes very infrequently. So it's pretty much the same for all of eternity, such as the information about the first 151 Pokemon. Now, the other things we're going to need for this data fetching process is some stateful variables. And these are things that are going to be very interactive, and that's how we know that they need state. And the first one we're going to define is going to be const data. And that's this data fetching process is some stateful variables. And these are things that are going to be very interactive, and that's how we know that they need state. And the first one we're going to define is going to be const data. And that's going to be the actual Pokemon information. So we're going to define a stateful variable. It's going to be data and set data inside of the square parentheses. And that's going to be use state. And when we're fetching data, I like to set the default to null. Now the reason I like to set it to null is because it just makes it very clear when we do and do not have Pokemon available. Now the reason I like to set it to null is because it just makes it very clear when we do and do not have Pokemon available. After that, we're going to need a secondary state, and that's called loading, and set loading equal to use state, and that's going to be loadable. After that, we're going to need a secondary state, and that's called loading, and set loading equal to use state, and that's going to be by default false. Because when we first load the page, we're not loading anything, then we go and fetch the information, at which time we start loading stuff. Now you can define a third state called use error. I'm not going to do that in this case. I'm going to at a later point show you how I like to manage errors inside of React. So these two states for the minute should do it for us. And that means we can complete the first step inside of our use effect by saying, adding a guard clause, if we are loading, if loading is true, return, if I can spell that correctly, and exit out of this code block. And that just means that if we're already fetching information, this doesn't continually get executed, because we'll catch this guard clause and we'll just return out of it, and it's going to ensure that we don't get any weird errors or, parallel events with race conditions and all that kind of complex stuff. So that's the first step done. Now we come to the next step, and we have to check or initialize our cache so that we can check if our information is available. Now I'm going to add something to this guard clause using the OR condition, and I'm going to say if we don't have access to local storage. So if loading is true, or we do not, we use the not key in front of local storage, then we want to return. And the reason we're doing this is because we're about to check local storage, which is our cache database. So if it doesn't exist, we're not ready for this logic to be run, and we want to exit out of this use effect callback function. So what we can do now is, since we've guaranteed that if we get past that guard clause, local storage exists, we can define our cache. Now I like to make my caches very simple. I'm just going to say let cache equal to an object. Now the reason we're going to I'm just going to say let cache equal to an object. Now the reason we're going to use an object is because if we come over to the Pokey API and submit, we can see that the information we're going to get back for the Ditto Pokemon, for example, is an object. Here we have this object. We can view the raw JSON. It's an object data type, and so that's why I'm defining my cache as an object. Also, because the JSON database that we're caching the information within is also an object once we pass it from JSON into an cache as an object. Also, because the JSON database that we're caching the information within is also an object once we pass it from JSON, we're caching the cache as an object. Also, because the JSON database that we're caching the information within is also an object once we pass it from JSON into an object. So we're going to define the cache as an empty object. After that, we're going to have some logic that says if local storage.get item, and we're going to access the Pokedex. Now, if we do find something when we look up the Pokedex within the local storage cache, then we can guarantee that we have cached something before, and that database exists. So now what we can do is overwrite this empty object cache, and we can say local storage.get item Pokedex. So we can literally get the item, which is the Pokedex, the cached Pokedex, and that is going to be returned as JSON. So we now have to pass that information. And that's going to update our cached Pokedex, and that is going to be literally get the item, which is the Pokedex, the cached Pokedex, and that is going to be returned as JSON. So we now have to pass that information. And that's going to update our cache so that if the cache does exist, if the local database does exist, we now have access to all of that information. So we've defined the cache. Pass that information. And that's going to update our cache so that if the cache does exist, if the local database does exist, we now have access to all of that information. So we've defined the cache. Now what we can do is say if selected Pokemon in the cache, then in here we can read from cache, and else we can fetch the information. So how this is going to work is we're going to say if selected Pokemon is in cache, then all we need to do is set data equal to cache and target the selected Pokemon, because that's going to access the data specific to that selected Pokemon from within the cache. Now, I've actually made a slight call. I'm going to change something just here. If we did find the information in the cache, what I'm actually going to do instead is turn this into a guard clause and return out of here. And that just saves me having an else block, and it makes my code a little bit neater. And instead, if we get past this clause right here, that means that we've done everything we need to check the cache. It doesn't exist, so we have to go and fetch the data from the API. So here, we passed all the cache stuff to no avail, and now need to fetch the data from the API. Need to fetch the stuff to. So here we passed all the cache stuff to no avail and now need to fetch the data from the API. Now to do that inside of a use effect, we define a fetch data function and then we invoke that function. So here I'm going to define a function, async function, and it's just going to be called fetch Pokemon data. Pretty straightforward. Now when I'm fetching data from an API, I love to use a try, catch, and finally block. And what this provides is a whole lot of error handling for our fetching of data. So we try some logic. If we get an error, we catch it, and in here we can console.log the error.message. That's going to show us the message if we receive one. And then at the end, we can set the loading to false, where at the start of invoking this function, we can set the loading equal to true. And just like that, we nearly have all the logic we need to go and fetch the information, with exception to the actual fetching of the information. Now, what we exception to the actual fetching of the information? Now, what we need to fetch data from an API is first off what I like to refer to as the base URL. And that's just a string. And in this case, the string URL data from an API is first off what I like to refer to as the base URL. And that's just a string. And in this case, the string is this one right here. This is the API where we're fetching this information from. I also like to define the suffix, which is the specific part, which is pretty much this here. So Pokemon/ditto, except in our case, it's going to be Pokemon/ plus the selected Pokemon. In our, which is pretty much this here. So Pokemon/ditto, except in our case, it's going to be Pokemon/ plus the selected Pokemon. So then what we can do is we can construct a final URL, which is where we're going to fetch the information from, and that's going to be the base URL plus the suffix. And then what we can do is we can define our fetch data. Now here we're going to use the fetch API. So we say const response is equal to await. We use the async await syntax because this is an asynchronous. Here we're going to use the fetch API. So we say const response is equal to await. We use the async await syntax because this is an asynchronous process, and we call the fetch API, and all we do is we pass in the final URL. When we execute this line of code, we're going to send that network. Now here we can define URL plus the suffix, and then what we can do is we can define our fetch data. Now here we're going to use the fetch API. So we say const response is equal to await. We use the async await syntax because this is an asynchronous process, and we call the fetch API, and all we do is we pass in the final URL. When we execute this line of code, we're going to send that network request to the API URL. The fetch API, and all we do is we pass in the final URL. We use the async await syntax because this is an asynchronous process, and we call the fetch API, and all we do is we pass in the final URL. When we execute this line of code, we're going to send that network request to the API, fetch the data, and that's going to be assigned to the response, where we can then access the Pokemon data from the response by awaiting the res.json method, and access the Pokemon data from the response by awaiting the res.json method. And then all we have to do from here is set data equal to the Pokemon data. And that's going to do the same thing as fetching from the cache. We now set the data equal to the Pokemon data. And the last thing we have to do is update the cache. So we now have the cache. We're going to update the cache at selected Pokemon. That's equal to the data that we've just update the cache at selected Pokemon. That's equal to the data that we've just fetched. And then we just need to say local storage.set item, and then we just json.stringify the cache. And that's going to cache the information we've just fetched. So the next time we run this, we can just fetch it from the cache instead of from the API. Now the last line before I run over this whole process once more over everything that we've done is we now come to the bottom of this function and we just have to invoke the fetch Pokemon data just like that. That is our data fetching process done. Is we now come to the bottom of this function and we just have to invoke the fetch Pokemon data just like that. That is our data fetching process done. Now let's go over it once more to make sure we completely understand what has just happened. So for step 1, we realize that we need to use a use effect because we need some code to go out and fetch new Pokemon data whenever the event where a user to go out and fetch new Pokemon use a use effect because we need some code to go out and fetch new Pokemon data whenever the event where a user clicks a new Pokemon is triggered. So when a new Pokemon is selected, some code. So for step 1, we realize that we need to use a use effect because we need some code to go out and fetch new Pokemon data whenever the event where a user clicks a new Pokemon is triggered. So when a new Pokemon is selected, the value of selected Pokemon changes. We need the code to be executed, so we just think use effect. We listen for that event. Once we've initialized our use effect, we add a callback function where the callback function is the logic to be executed when that event occurs. And the first thing we do is we have a guard clause where we say if we're currently loading information, cache, executing this logic. In fact, access the cache. So we define an empty cache and then we go to the local storage to see if we have any information saved to the string Pokedex. If we do actually get an item under the name Pokedex, then we confirm that we have that information. So we can get that out, pass it, because currently it's JSON, we pass it into an object, and then we update the cache to now be equal to that entire cached Pokedex. Now that we have the cache, we simply check if the selected Pokemon is in the cache. If it is, we update the state to match the value. We fetch it from the cache and we set that new state to match, and we exit out of this whole code block because we've just gone and fetched the information. If we get past this code, then we don't have access to that Pokemon in the cache. Maybe there's no cache, or maybe we just haven't cached that specific Pokemon. So now we define the logic we need to go and actually fetch the information from the API. So we create an asynchronous function called fetch Pokemon data. And when we initialize or invoke this function, which we do down here, the first thing we do is we set loading to true. And that way, if we encounter or execute this code block again, we're going to exit out of it because it's currently loading. So we say we're loading some information. We define exactly where we're going to load that information or fetch that information from. And then we simply fetch from that API. And then when we get the response from the API with the information, we basically access the JSON from within the response to load that information or fetch that information from. And then we simply fetch from that API. And then when we get the response from the API with the information, we basically access the JSON from within the response object. And then we assign the Pokemon data to our state. The screen updates to match, and then we also add that new information about that specific Pokemon that we've just fetched. We add it to our cache, and then we update our cache, or basically save it to local storage. Now I made one mistake in here. Obviously we stringify the cache, which is turning the object into JSON, but we also have to assign the key, and we're saving it to the key Pokedex, and that is the first argument in the set item. So we first define the key that we're setting our JSON database to, and then we actually specify the data that we want to save to that key. And if we go ahead and save that, as I said before, that is all of our logic to fetch the information done. Now I'm going to go ahead and throw in one line here, console.log Pokemon data, because that's going to tell us exactly what the information we've fetched looks like. And now that I've added that line, if I save the file and we come back to our application, James's Pokedex, it loaded some stuff. We should be able to come over to the developer tools, to the console, and we get some errors. So first up, it looks like in our side nav, we haven't added a unique key. So let's come across to the side nav. Here we have this map. When you use a map, if you
Hi. In field. Yeah, still going.
you come across to the side nav, here we have this map. When you use a map, if you recall, the parent that is returned from that map needs to have the unique identifier key attribute, where the key is just equal to the unique value, which is going to be the index in the array. So if we save that and reload the page, we still get some secondary errors, where it looks like now we just haven't defined use state inside of our Poke card. And that's absolutely true. We're calling the hook, but we haven't imported it. We've just imported use effect. So we just have to add in use state just like that. And now when we save that and refresh the page, we get some more errors. And the reason we're getting this error is because I muddled up some of these commands. So this should, So this should all be Pokedex. All these keys should be Pokedex, not Pokemon. And one quick thing to note, if you do find yourself sending out thousands of networking requests, DDoSing the Pokedex API, all you want to do is come to your terminal, Control-C to exit out, and refresh the page, and it will stop that process, just in case that does end up happening. Now, one thing I'm going to do, because I realized it was causing an error, is actually remove loading. And the reason we don't want to include loading in the dependency array is because we don't want to re-trigger this use effect when loading changes. We only want to trigger it when the selected Pokemon changes. And the last thing we're going to do is update loading. And the reason we don't want to include loading in the dependency array is because we don't want to re-trigger this use effect when loading changes. We only want to trigger it when the selected Pokemon changes. And the last thing we're going to do is update this URL here so that we can actually fetch adequate information. And basically what's happening is that this shouldn't just be selected Pokemon. It actually needs to be one of our util functions, which is get poke. Let's look at what it's called. If we come into utils, scroll down the function, we need to get Pokedex number. So we have to get the Pokedex number and then access the selected Pokemon. Now we'll have to import that utility function from the utils folder. And now when we save that code, basically what's happened is we were fetching the 0th Pokemon, which doesn't exist. The first index is 001, so it's the first index. And so now that we're actually fetching the information, we can see that it's logging out, and we have all the abilities, the cries, the forms, the game indices, the moves, and all that good stuff. So we had a little bit of an error there, but we have fixed it. The only thing that should be in the dependency array is the selected Pokemon, not loading. So now that we have this data, what we can do is display it on the screen. And that is pretty straightforward. First, what we're going to do is open this div up onto some new logic equal to, and this the selected Pokemon, we're going to make sure we import from some JavaScript, and in here we're going to call the get full Pokedex number. With the selected Pokemon, we're going to make sure we import that utility function, and then we're just going to throw a hash in front of it, because that refers to the number. So we'll put the hash in front, and now when I save that, that shows up on our screen. Now one cool thing we'll note, if we refresh the page, all of that information goes away, and our use effect does not run again. Well, actually that's not true. Our fetch data specifically does not run. The use effect has run, except we now access that information from our cache. If we come over to the developer tools and the application tab, within our
Use effect is a Reactor that lets you synchronize a component with an external system. Synchronize a component with an external system. Okay. Call use effect at the top of a top level of your component. At the top level of your component to declare an effect. Call use at the top level. Use effect at the top level of your component to declare an effect. Setup dependencies. Use effect setup dependencies. That's function chart. Connections. Parameters. See more examples below. Connection, create connection. Okay. Server URL, room UID, connection.connect. Return. Neither. Parameters. Setup. Setup. What the hell is that? The function with your fx logic. Your setup function में setup and dependencies. That's the setup dependencies. Setup function. The function with your fx logic. No, use effect. That's the function. Add a function, and that's the dependency. The function with your fx logic. The function with your fx logic. Your function with your fx logic. Okay. Your setup function may also optionally return a cleanup function. Okay, cleanup function. Yacho. When your components commit. When your component commit. Okay. When your component commits, React will run your setup function. React commits changes at all. After rendering rendering, calling your components. Reactor will modify the DOM. For initial renders, Reactor will use the function with your effects logic setup. Your setup function may also optionally return a cleanup function. When your component commits, React will run your setup function. After every commit with changed dependencies, React will first run the cleanup function if you provide it with the old values, and then run your setup function with the new values after your component is removed from the DOM. React will run your cleanup function. Okay. Optional dependencies. The list of all reactive values referenced inside of setup code. The list of all reactive values. Optional dependency. The list of all reactive values referred inside of the setup code. Reactive values include props, state, and all the variables and functions declared directly inside your component's body. Functions declared directly inside your component's body. If your linter is if your linter is configured for React, linter? What's this? Linter. A linter is a tool that checks your code. A linter is a tool that checks your code for mistakes, bad practices, and style issues before it runs. A linter tells you this code works, but it's written badly or dangerous. Use variables, unused variables. What a linter catches: unused variables, unused imports, missing dependencies, possible bugs, inconsistent formatting, bad React patterns. Okay. If your linter is configured for React, it will verify that every React value is correctly. If your linter is configured for React, it will verify that every reactive value is correctly specified as a dependency. The list of dependencies must have a constant number of items and be written in line like dep1, dep2, dep3. The list of dependencies must have a constant number of items and be written in line like dep1, dep2, dep3. The list of dependencies must have a constant number of items, and a return in line like dep1, dep2, dep3. Okay. React will compare each dependency with its previous value using the object.is compare. React will compare each dependency with its previous values using object.is comparison. If you omit this argument, your effect will rerun after every commit of the components. Compare each dependency with its previous value using comparison. If you omit this argument, your effect will rerun after every commit of the component. See the references written passing an array out of. Then sees an array. Use effect returns undefined. Who's gonna read all that? Rapid effect, all that. No, yeah. Connecting to external system caveat. What's this? Caveat. We can use this. Read this. How do you say it?
Caveats.
Caveat. Use effect is a hook, so you can only call it at the top level of your component, or your own hooks, use effect is a hook, so you can call only you can only call it at the top level of your component or your own hooks. You can't call it inside loops or conditions. You cannot call it inside loops and conditions. If you need that, extract a new component and move the state into that. State into it. Extract a new component and move the state into it. Oh, okay. If you're not trying to synchronize with some external system, you probably don't need an effect. If you're not trying to synchronize with some external system, you probably don't need an effect. Okay. When strict mode is on, React will run. When strict mode is on, React will run one extra development only setup plus cleanup cycle before the first real setup. Strict mode is on. React will run one extra development only setup plus cleanup cycle before the first real setup. This is a stress test that ensures that your cleanup logic mirrors your setup logic. This is a stress test that ensures that your cleanup logic mirrors your setup logic, and it stops or undoes whatever the setup is doing. If this causes a problem, implement the cleanup function. If some of your dependencies are objects or functions defined inside the component, there is a risk that they will cause the effect to rerun more often than needed. To fix this, remove unnecessary object and function dependencies. You can also extract state updates. And a non-reactive logic outside of your effect. You can also extract state updates. You can also extract state updates. And extract state updates. Updating जो कौन करेगा If some of your dependencies are objects or functions defined inside the component, there is a risk that they will cause the effect to rerun more often than needed. To fix this, remove unnecessary object and function dependencies. You can also extract state updates and a non-reactive logic outside of your effect. You can also extract state updates and non-reactive logic outside of your okay. If your effect wasn't caused by an interaction like a click, React will generally let the browser paint the update screen first before running your effect. React will generally let the browser, if your effect wasn't caused by an interaction like a click, React will generally let the browser paint the updated screen first. React will generally let the browser paint the update its screen first before running your effect. If your Reactor is doing something visual, for example positioning a tooltip and the delay is noticeable, for example it flickers, replace use effect with use layout effect. Layout. If your effect is caused by an interaction like a click, React may run your effect before the browser paints the updated screen. This ensures that the result of your effect can be observed by the event system. This ensures that the result of your effect can be observed by the event system. This ensures that the result of your effect can be observed by the event system. At the event system. Okay. Usually this works as expected. However, if you must defer the work until the paint, such as an alert, you can use a set timeout. Even if you're However, if you must defer the work until after paint, such as an alert. Even if your effect was caused by an interaction like a clack, React may allow the browser to repaint the screen before processing. Even if your effect was caused by an interaction like a clack, React may allow the browser to repaint the screen before processing the state updates inside your effect. Usually this works as expected. However, if you must block the browser from repainting the screen, you need to replace use layout. Effects only run on the client. They don't run during server rendering. Connecting to external system and wrapping effects in custom hooks, controlling a non-react widget. Okay. Not this though. Still here. Fetching the API. So I'm gonna do that first. Using the effect. The easy guide. Meshlet update keys. Okay, props, selected props, and what's next? Okay, we are gonna define some use states first. Yeah, let's do that first. I'll be using also const data. It's going to be the first one. Data set data and use state and I'm gonna set it to no data no. What is going to be no? Okay, let's remove that. Much loading set loading use state. Initial value is going to be false. Initially is false because it's not loading. Skill not yet needed, and the two states are fine for now. Nope. No. That's a no from me. That's a no. That's a no. Mama. Which mood? Actually, it's different one, not the one. Yeah, you're gonna use the use effect. Wait a minute. Why do we use effect? Hook. I don't know that first. How is doing? What's just doing? That's the thing of later. We use effect hook to run side effects in React after the component renders. We use the use effect hook. One line meaning, memorize this. Use effect lets you run code that interacts with the outside world after React renders the UI. Use effect lets you run the code. That interacts with the outside world after React renders the UI. Use effect lets you use effect lets you run code that interacts with the outside world. Lets you run the code which interacts with the outside world after React renders the UI. After React renders the UI, use effect lets you run code that interacts with the outside world. What side effect means? Side effect is anything that is not just returning JSX. Examples featuring data from an API. That's a side effect. Side effect is anything that is not just returning JSX. Fetching data from an API, updating the document title, setting timers, set timeout, set interval, subscribing to events, manually touching the DOM, all that. Basic syntax, use an arrow function, and then we have use sorry. What you call that? Second one is dependency. First one is setup and dependency. Set up the function with your fx logic. Your setup may optionally return a cleaner function to after commit changes dependency with the cleaner process. हट बात की मुझे सिखा रहा. Basic syntax, use effect, and this is setup and then dependency. Why we can't do this directly in component body? Fetch data, renders, React renders often. This would cause infinite loops. If you're gonna fetching a data, runs on every render. Okay. Performance issue, duplicate API calls. Runs. This would cause runs on every render. Bad. That's bad. Infinite loops. What use effect guarantees? React guarantees effects run after render. effects run after render. Effects after render. Effects run after. What use effect guarantees? React guarantees effects run after render. Effects run only when dependencies change, cleanup happens correctly. Dependency array very important. No dependency array. No, like that. Runs every render. The code is gonna run every render. Infinite loop. It's gonna run every time. No dependency if you provide no dependency. Empty array runs once on mount. What do you mean by that? Runs once on mount. Hang on, ये कराओ ना मुझे दिखा रहा क्या When we say runs on mount, we are describing when the code inside use effect executes in the component's life cycle. What mount means? Mount equals mount means when a component is added to the screen for the first time. When a component is added to the screen for the first time. Component appears mounted, component updates re-render, components removed unmounted. When we say runs once on mount, we are describing when the code inside use effect executes in the component's life cycle. Component appears mounted, component updates. What this code means. Step by step. React renders the component for the first time. React shows the UI on the screen. Use effect run after the render. Runs after the render. Okay. Use effect. React renders the component for the first time. React shows the UI on the screen. Okay. The use effect runs after that render. Because the dependency array is empty, React says nothing can change here, so never run this again. It's gonna run once. Runs once. Yeah. So it runs only once right after the component appears. Why the empty array causes this? The dependency array tells React when to rerun the effect. I depend on nothing. Empty array, that's what it says. So it only runs once. Nothing can change, so no rerun. Real life example, fetch data once. Hash data once your page loads. This means fetch to do's once when the page loads, not on every render. Baby words. It runs once on the mouth. Means the code runs only the first time the component shows up. Okay, baby. Guarantee no dependency array with dependencies runs when user ID changes. Okay. Cleanup must set ID, set interval, clear interval. We are clearing the interval, yes, okay. Like that. Okay. Baby words. Use effect is for doing things after React shows the screen. Use effect is for doing things after React shows the screen. doing things. Use effect is used to handle side effects like data fetching, subscription after renders. After render, with control over when they run, with control over when they run. When not to use effect. Calculations use normal JS. Derived data use variables. Event handlers use functions. Okay. Let's copy all that. Dang. Getting bombarded with the amount of information. Jana Jana Tunde Tichitavana. ये क्या है अभी? अरे पता नहीं क्या है यार, हट पाया इसके नाम. ये कौन है? मोला. नानी चित्तंदा. नानी संदा तेमे. Ma ciotto ne ciotto ciotto da che ciotto 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 that's that. And oh yeah, it's this one. And biasiak dependency dependency. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, let's go back to the code. So doko actually return is below that. You're gonna do use effect over here. Use effect. Wow. And that's the use, what you call it, what's the name, setup, and that's a dependency. And yeah, so now we're gonna write our logic here in the dependency, not dependency, what you call it, setup. In the setup we're gonna write the use effects logic, exit logic. First we're gonna write the exit logic here. If in case loading, okay, or not, if it's not local storage, then we just return guard clause. That's called guard clause. Guard clause. Is it right? Is it right? Clause khand. Yeah, guard clause. You're just gonna return. Go back. It says go back. and here now you're gonna write check. Is it right? Yeah. No, it's not. Yeah, it is right. Check if the selected Pokemon information is available in the cache. Okay. Check if the selected Pokemon information is available in the cache. So first what you're gonna do is define the cache here. We're gonna do that now. So let cache, define a function first. Okay, not a function, like variable cache, and if it's local storage dot get item. Now get item is a method. Okay, what it does, get item method of storage interface. When passed a key name will return that key's value, or null if key doesn't exist in the storage. Okay, local storage, the get item method of the storage interface. It's the storage interface. This is method. When passed a key name, if we pass a key name in the as an argument in the get item function, it's gonna return will return that key's value, or null if that key does not exist in the given storage object. Actually you can do that. So this is a web storage API method used to read data from browser storage, usually local storage or session storage. Most common, use local storage dot get item. What it does, returns the value stored under the given key, or null if it doesn't exist. Okay, returns the value stored under the given key, or null if it doesn't exist. Simple example, that a theme dark, it's gonna look for theme is that you're gonna set value and then get value. So theme dark is gonna theme Becca Becky Hathi Iki Nazar me sab manzil pai da da tick da china nong. Important concept. Values are stored as a string. Okay, string, and then count. Count 5, count set item, count 5. So count as a 5. Set item function sets the key value, and then get item gives the what does it do? Return the value is stored under the given key. Object must be parsed like that if it's an object, local storage, and then JSON. We gonna have to stringify it first if you're gonna set it like that. So stringify the object, JSON stringify, and then you got like that. Object must be parsed. Object must be parsed. So stored user, JSON parse local storage get item user. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Stringify. Values are stored as string. Values are stored as string. When key does not exist, missing, not always, handle, not common React uses as that. Okay, load saved data once when the component mounts. Okay, local storage persist after device refresh, persist after browser close. Origin. Oh, baby words. Get item gets saved data from the browser. Save the data from the browser. छोटो मैड है. अरे यार ये क्या है बीच में जो पागल आगे तो नहीं हो. We're gonna copy that. Nothing, just nothing happened. I'm just trying to learning other stuff that I don't know. What you call it? Okay. Hi. So this H1 baby. 1 2 3 get item. Sasugane. No bug yet. No bug. There is no bug. Thanks for the help, but I'm just writing the code for the API and that, yeah. Where was I? Stop doing that. Okay, so you're gonna provide the key here as an argument, that is Pokédex, and if it does that, if that card is present, okay, that key card is present, then we do cache, set the value of cache to local choto, local storage, and get item. Yeah, getting the item again. Okay, getting the item, and then Pokédex. And yeah, of course we're gonna stringify JSON JSON parse it. no. Okay, like that, and now, okay. JSON parses JavaScript function that converts JSON into a valuable JavaScript JSON string into a valuable JavaScript value object array at C. One line meaning JSON parse function turns a string back into real JavaScript data. So why it's needed? Browser storage, local storage, API files stores data as strings only. Local storage, APIs and files stores data as strings only. So when we read the data, you must parse it. And turns a string back into a real JavaScript object. Yes. Okay. We are turning the string back into a real JavaScript data. व्याकरण के नियमों के अनुसार या व्याकरण सम्मत क्या है? String is that, object is that, we are parsing it, like no, so string, we are parsing it, so it becomes an object. रटाना क्या है? सुबह alarm. Before parse string, after parse. Okay. Converts a string to an object. Yeah, simple words. And all that, JavaScript. Use an array and spread the parsed data. I'm following the tutorial. I'm gonna finish the tutorial first. You're seeing it now, like to do that and all that. I don't know much. I'm learning, still learning this stuff. So I'm gonna follow the tutorial first, and after finishing it, I might make some changes according to whatever I want to do. Wait a minute. I'm a noob. माथा क्यों टकटका रहा हूँ मैं? तो ये भी भूल गया मैं तो. Okay. Why you declared cache as an object? Where? Cache. We're gonna store the information here. We're gonna get use JSON server. As I said, I'm still a beginner. I don't know all those JSON server and all that. I'm following the instructor, what he coded. I'm then trying to understand his code right now. Yeah. I'm trying to understand this code and then just trying to copy it. That's it. Where was I? Yeah, it does that. And now check if the selector, we're gonna check if the selected Pokemon is in the cache. Pokemon is in the cache, otherwise we're gonna fetch from from the API. Okay, otherwise fetch from the if selected Pokemon in cache bro, use JS done. Your JS done. But I know some basics. Yeah, learning this stuff while doing the thing. Read from cache. Set. Okay. Learn more of JS. Yeah, I will learn. I know. That's what I'm telling. I learned JS like 8 months ago, and I haven't done any. I didn't do any coding for 8 months. So yeah. So now I just do the thing, and if I am stuck at some place, I just do ChatGPT. JS first रा पक्का తర్వాత React की వచ్చి దెంగించుకో. What the heck is that? What language is that? Reactor పుచ్చవుట తెలుగు ప్రథమ రా JS ప్రథమ రా పుక్క తర్వాత ప్రతిక్రియకి వచ్చి దెంగించుకో. What's the meaning of that? Pratham. I know, but I know I know much to understand this. Set data. Okay, let's set data and cache and first learn JS, then learn React in hash tabs. Come on, let me do my thing, man. I've done enough JS. And I'm just gonna learn it by doing this, by doing like this. Set data, cache, and what's happening here? Selected Pokemon. Selected Pokemon. Okay, I think I know. Yeah, selected Pokemon and cache. Chotto matte ne. Baby. Cha. cache data and setting React state with it and explain it step by step. Why did you like that? No. A string key representing the current selection. Example, selected Pokemon Pikachu. Object property. This is object property access. Access using a dynamic key. Question. This is a core JavaScript concept, not Reactor. Okay. Yeah. Core short answer first. Full explanation. Cache means use the value of the variable as the key. Okay. Yeah, of course my JS is weak. Not weak. I don't even know the basic stuff. Cache selected Pokemon is not a okay. Means use the value of the variable as the key. Use the value of this variable as the key. What cache is? Cache is a plain JavaScript object. Okay. Two ways to access object properties. Dot not fixed. Dot not fixed key. Dynamic key. Okay. Bracket notation, dynamic key. Cache selected Pokemon. Key comes from an variable. Key comes from variable. Value is decided at runtime. Constant selected Pokemon Pikachu. Cache selected Pokemon. Why required? This would be wrong because JavaScript will look for a key literally named. Literally name dynamic key. That's a dynamic key used from a variable. Value is decided at runtime because JavaScript will look for a key name directly. Not that. Okay, Babasar. So you need a brackets to say use the values inside the variable, not the variable name. Use the values inside the variable, not the variable. What happens internally? JavaScript does this. Okay. Why it looks like a function? What is it? Maybe where the brackets mean. Look inside the box using this label. The notation is used like that. Mulyaram. Mula Sala. अबे हटना अपन नहीं करता सब कुछ अबे हटना है छोड़ अबे हटना ये ला कुट्टी 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 मजा है to find the cache and set data इधर मैं ये कर देगा ये ले हट में आया okay select a dynamic key. It's a dynamic key. अपन में अलग करते हैं console.log found. Okay, we'll do that. God dang it, I can't even write. And then return. What about the cleanup function? Yeah, you're gonna make the API call and all that now. We passed all the cache stuff to to avail, and now we pass all the cache stuff to no avail, and now need to fetch the data from the API. Needs to fetch the data from the API. Can I think of it? Async. Async. Async function. Pokemon data. Fetch Pokemon data. It's keyboardy. Refresher. What I need is a refresher, not to learn everything again. Fuck that, I ain't doing that shit. I've done it already. I need a refresher just to trigger that thing, just to extract the information out of my brain, buried deep inside at the bottom. Bitch. Sorry. We can use async function to write asynchronous non-blocking code in a clean, readable, synchronous looking way. Asynchronous code in a clean. We use async function to write a synchronous non-blocking code in a clean, readable, synchronous. looking at one line meaning memorizers. Async lets a function pause while waiting for async work without blocking the program. Async lets a function pause. Async lets a function pause while waiting for async work without blocking the program. Async lets a function pause. Lets a function pause. Lets a function pause while waiting for async. Async lets a function pause while waiting for async work without blocking the program. The problem async solves. Without async, hard to read. Nested, harder to reason about. With async, clean baby. Reads top to bottom like normal code. Norimaru kodo. When async actually does, what async actually does, when you write async function fetch data JavaScript guarantees, the function always returns a promise. JavaScript, I really need to watch this refresher video. JavaScript guarantees, the function always returns a promise. The function always returns a promise. You can use await inside it. Function always returns a promise. You can use await inside it. What await means very important. Await fetch. Pause this function until the promise resolves. And then continue. Only a promise. Only the function pauses. The rest of the app keeps running. The function always returns a promise. The rest of the programs runs. Await means very important. Means pause this function until the promise resolves. Then continue. Pause this function until the promise resolves. Then continue. Important. Only the function pauses. The rest of the app keeps running. Use cases: real world API calls. Most common. Async function fetch data, const rest, await, fetch URL data, await API calls, waiting for multiple sync, async steps, await, error handling. Okay, cleaner than catch. Dotto catcho. That catch chain. Yeah. Catch if that. No, we don't do that. React side effect use. React side effect user can. What happens if you don't use async? You must use dot then. Code becomes harder to read. Error handling becomes messy. Async lets you wait for things like data from the internet without freezing the app. Lets you wait for things like data from the internet without freezing the app. Interview async functions are fully asynchronous code by allowing await syntax and always return a promise. Okay. Do I have that? I'm gonna read that. बकचोदी नहीं करने का बेटे, समझा ना, बकचोदी नहीं करना मेरे साथ। मेरा दिमाग खराब हो जाएगा नहीं। बकचोदी करते हैं, चोरी करा दे। बैंकलैंड where was I? Yeah, not this. Bye. Okay, of course. And okay. Yeah, async function fetch Pokemon data. So what we're gonna do first is set loading to true. We're gonna do that first. Okay, then we'll try catch error, try catch ASCII. That's our error. We catch our error errors here, and finally I think it's not run. If not, no. If not, no. Error message. Okay. On the console, you can console the error message. Okay, console.log and a hand gotcha. Error message. Finally this is our cleanup code, you can say. I'm gonna clean a function. Set the loading to false. Now we do the real thing here. Const base URL. Okay, base URL is this. Pocky ボコにしてやるよ。だよ、ボケにしてやるよ。प्रथम च get lost sometimes thinking about stuff. Just snapped myself back to reality. It's the reality const suffix for URL. No Pokemon ドットってことさ。ところでplus get Pokédex number. Not full Pokédex number. Not actually. Pokédex number only. Pokédex number. Pokédex. Get Pokédex number index is index plus 1. Yeah. Da yo ne. I? I definitely was not in this tab. これなんだっけ? Selected Pokemon. Of course. Selected Pokemon. Selected Pokemon. Pakistan. Final URL is going to be base URL plus suffix. Like that, suffix, and we're gonna make a full URL. 1 2 3 index plus 1. There's Pokemon 1 2 3 like that. That's gonna be the URL. Const. Yeah. Oh wait. Res response. Oh wait, we can await. Fetch final URL first. Await till we fetch the URL. Fetch URL. Fetch URL first. Charade. Oh, it's been 3 hours. Not that much. Three hours is fine. Three hours is like baby talk. What's up, baby? Baby. API using my first API. What was I doing? Okay. Which function is a built-in browser API used to make web API function? This built-in browser API. Usually to get data from a server. Fetch function. Fetch function is a built-in browser API function that you use to make HTTP requests, usually to get data from the server. One line meaning memorize. Fetch sends a request to a URL and returns a promise that resolves to a response. Returns to a promise. Gonna get something. Then it resolves to a response. Sends a request to a server and returns a promise with response. Yeah, I prefer this. Bitch. Fetch sends a request to a URL and returns a promise that resolves to a response. And what this line means, step by step. Fetch final URL, sends a HTTP request, get by default to final URL, immediately returns a promise. Pauses the async until the promise resolves. Pauses the async until the promise resolves. And response object contains status, headers, body not the data yet. Important, rest is not the data, JSON data. Okay, common next tab, very important. Rest is not the JSON data. The response object contains status, header, body, not the data yet. Rest only contains the status, headers, body, and not the data yet. Common next step, very important. Data like that reads the response, converts. Reads the response body, converts JSON. Is not the JSON data. This is not the JSON data. Converts JSON to JavaScript object. For basic example, for flow, async function, fetch Pokemon, cons, res, await, response, JSON. What fetch can do? Get data, post data, put, delete, send headers. Fetch can do get data, post data, put, delete, send headers, send body, send body. Important behavior, interview relevant, does not throw on a HTTP. Fetch does not throw an HTTP error. Okay, 404, 500 still resolve. You must check. Maybe was ask the internet for data. Is a browser API for making HTTP request that returns a promise resolving to a response. That returns a promise resolving to a response object. Returns a promise that express. Yes. Sorry. मारूंगा बहुत मारूंगा बहुत मारूंगा Sharakara. Correct explanation. Rest JSON. This is an important conflict and many people misunderstand it. Response JSON in one line. Rest JSON reads the HTTP response body and converts JSON text into a JavaScript object. Let's go. Rest JSON in one line. JSON reads the HTTP response, fetch data, promise, settles, resolves. Data. Fetch is a browser asks for interpret data. is a browser API for making HTTP requests that returns a promise resolving to a response. Returns a promise. Okay, HTTP request. Browser API for making HTTP request. We are making an HTTP request that returns a promise resolving to a response object. Here is a deep cut. This is an important concept. Many people misunderstand it. What rest.json is one line. Rest JSON reads the HTTP response body and converts a JSON text into a JavaScript object. Rest JSON reads the HTTP response body and converts JSON text into JavaScript. Converts JSON text into JavaScript object. You usually see it like this. Okay, I like this. Okay. Data response data await. Okay, important. Response is a response. REST is a response object. It does not contain usable data yet. REST is a response object. It does not contain usable data yet. What fetch actually returns? REST await fetch URL. REST contains status. What REST actually contains? What fetch actually returns? REST status code. Status okay, true, false, headers, a body, stream, row data, not pass. The body is still unread at this point. What REST JSON does step by step. What you call this, and JavaScript does the following: reads the response body stream, converts the row bytes to text, reads the response body stream, converts the raw byte text, parses the text as JSON, converts it into parses the text, converts the raw bytes into text, and parses the text as JSON, converts it into a JavaScript value object array, returns it as a promise. That's why you must use await. Yeah, of course. Returns it as a promise. Parsing happens asynchronously because a network data arrives over time. The body is a stream, not a string. Body is a stream, not a string. Very important rule. Many miss this. You can only read the body once. Break like that and not error. Oh no, not allowed. No, it returns a promise. If we wait, then it returns past data. Network arrives over time. The stream is always consumed. तो बंद करना इसको. दिमाग खराब कर रहा है मेरा. The stream is always consumed. Who laughs like that? If you need it twice, you must clone the response. Well, fine. Fine. Ching-ling-ling-ling-ling. One liner, baby, do that, and ito response, like do that, and that's it. Now we know. Well, where was I? Cache. Yeah, what's up? Yeah, it's called Anna. Constant response await fetch final URL. Fetching the data API chain inline and const and Pokemon data. Const Pokemon. I'm gonna store it here. This Pokemon data. You can store it in this. You're gonna wait, like, you know. Okay, response in JSON, we do that, and we're gonna wait, of course, because it returns a promise, not the actual data, so that's why we need to return. Then we set data, Pokemon data, we set the data here. Data and data, setting the data null data and Pokemon data. Okay, console fetch data, cache, selected data is okay, we are storing the data, Pokemon data, into the cache here, cache 1, cache set data Pokemon. Okay, let's do the console first. Console.log fetch the Pokemon data, baby. Okay, it looks weird. Pokemon Sata, Pokemano, then cache, and cache is our object. An object. Pokemon selected. Look for this dynamic key. Dynamic key is that. I'm gonna set it to this Pokemon data. Not local storage and set item. JSON stringified. Okay, local storage. We can store local storage. That set item. Baby, chain on the Pokédex. That Pokédex. Yeah. This too. Stringify cache. Okay. Object cache bitch. Sure. JSON stringify cache, it's an object. We're gonna stringify it. I'm gonna set it. Oh yeah. My stomach is like that. Fetch Pokemon API. Fetch it, bitch. I'm gonna call the function. all the function fetch or Pokemon API. If we fetch from the API, make sure to save the information to cache for the next time. That we did that here. I'm gonna like that. Selected Pokemon. Selected Pokemon. Selected Pokemon. Selected Pokemon. Selected Pokemon. Okay, that in data. Poke card. What do we need to change? Actually, we'll have some errors first. Let's try to fix. Okay, each child in a list should have. Each child in a list should have prop nav. Key かな Key だったっけक्या करते हैं इसको ओह है क्या हो गया ये थोड़ी देर रुक तो जा भाई रुक जा yeah, come on should have a prop net side sound okay
local storage.
Come on, I'm gonna just gonna use that. Other selected Pokemon index. Pokemon index. Yeah, no kana. Do kana. Chotto matte ne. Confidence right now. All that.
Which doesn't. We do thousands of networking requests. Control C in case that does. We don't want to trigger when the selected. We can actually fetch adequate information to be one become a number. Access the selected Pokemon from the utils folder, and now when we save that code indexes information, we can see that it's logging out index and so it doesn't exist. Key that. And now that James is posted to the our site,
Bitch. Ah, yeah. Yeah. Index. Oh. Ah! Red screen. Okay, uncaught. Use effect is not. Oh, of course. Use effect is not defined. Of course, it's not defined. Use effect is not defined. Oh, I see it. Mama. Not here, nothing gonna happen. I close my window and duplicate it. You go there to see what's going on.
Side nav, we haven't added a unique key, so let's come across to the side nav. Here we have this map. When you use a map, if you the key is just equal to the, we save that and reload, which is going to still get some secondary errors, where it looks like now we absolutely the page we get some more errors, and the reason we're getting this error, the out and refresh the page and it to your networking request, not Pokemon. And one quick thing to note, if you do find yourself sending out thousands of networking requests, this error is because I muddled up some of these commands. So this should all be Pokedex. All these keys should be Pokedex, not Pokemon. And one quick thing to note, if you do find yourself sending out thousands of networking requests, DDoSing the Pokedex API, all you want to do is come to your terminal, Control-C to exit out, and refresh the page, and it will stop that process, just in case that does end up happening. Now, one thing I'm going to do, because I realized it was causing an error, is actually remove loading. And the reason we don't want to include loading in the dependency array is because we don't want to re-trigger this use effect causing an error, just in case that does end up happening. Now, one thing I'm going to do, because I realized it was causing an error, is actually remove loading. And the reason we don't want to include loading in the dependency array is because we don't want to re-trigger this use effect when loading changes. We only want to trigger it when the selected Pokemon changes. And the last thing we're going to do is update this URL here so that we can actually fetch adequate information. And basically what's happening is that this shouldn't just be selected Pokemon. It actually needs to be one of our util functions, which is get poke. Let's look at what it's called. If we come into utils, scroll down the function, we need to get Pokedex number. So we have to get the Pokedex number and then access the selected Pokemon. Now we'll have to import that utility function from the utils folder, and now when we save that code, basically what's happened is we were fetching the 0th Pokemon, which doesn't exist. The first code, basically what's happened is we were fetching the 0th Pokemon, which doesn't exist. The first index is 001, so you know it's the first index, and so now that we're actually fetching the information, we can see that it's
oh yeah, it's not gonna display yet. You have to do that. What am I clicking? Which Pokemon in cache? Wait a minute. Pokemon data. Did I log it? Suffix finally auto const data console log shikashkat taki dostan से क्या क्या आ रहा है साले यार of course this is that so consolidate cache. It's not even showing this. The console. Yeah, I found Pokemon in cache. Ah, it's already in the cache. How do I clear the cache? Okay, I will clear the cache first. That's why it's not. It's already there, cause the uni. It's cause and it's already in the cache. That's why. Cache. Is there a shortcut to clear the cache? Oh gosh. Oh, come on. Come on, I'm trying to do it, bitch. Cache. 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 C-H-E-A. Cache. Cache, baby. I need to pee. It's so bad. It's bad. ये तो 4 जन्म लगाएगा इतना टाइम क्या मेरे पास काचे बेटा काचे कहाँ पे हैं रहे कच्चे Let's do this thing. Oh yeah, stupid man. Delete it fast from here. That's stupid. Stupid. And I correct. Yeah, this time. Pokemon data fetched. It fetched it fucking hell. Cache Pokemon Go. Why is it printing 2 times though? Bulbasaur. Is it Bulbasaur? I don't know. Yeah, it's Bulbasaur species. Bulbasaur. Did something. I need to pee. I'll be back.